Hello, I'm Chris Hecker, and from Maxis in San Francisco, or Emeryville, which is outside San Francisco. And today I'm going to talk about games, which is a surprise, given it's a game conference, but also games and meaning, and what that means, actually, and kind of where games sit in the context of other art and entertainment forms. So first, this talk is in development. It is not fully gestated yet, so it's a little rough around the edges, but that means you're getting the raw, cutting-edge thoughts, for better or for worse. I talk very fast, for which I apologize. Just raise your hand and tell me to slow down if I'm going too fast or whatever, or ask questions if something wasn't clear. The other thing I need to mention is that these are my opinions. I've gotten in trouble for having said controversial things in public and having them represented as Electronic Arts' opinion. So this is my opinion, if make no mistake about it. So here, I'm going to start with a couple questions that you should think about. Why? So I assume most of you either make games or want to make games, you're students, or report on games if you're journalists or whatever. And the question is, why? Look, I'm in the way of my question. So why do you make games? And there's a bunch of, I'm not going to say there's a right or a wrong answer to most of these questions, but some reasons you might make games is money. It's a job, right? It's a fun job. It's one of the better jobs. Those are totally reasonable answers to that question. Fame. This didn't used to be an option for wanting to make games. Nowadays, you can actually get moderately famous making games. Maybe that's a reason for you. You want to entertain people. I think that games, I think entertainment in general is a noble pursuit. I'm not one of the people who thinks that there's doctors are somehow better than comedians or something like that. I think the society needs entertainers just as much as they need doctors and lawyers and firemen. And I think it's an important job. One that you don't see very often when you talk about games, but you would find if we were talking to a bunch of film students or a bunch of professional writers, is self-expression. Do you make games because you have something you want to say to the world or about yourself or something? And this is becoming more common, actually. So think about that question. Another question to think about is, do games belong on this slide once I fill in things like Casablanca, Les Miserables? This is the author of a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel named Gilead. There's a Rembrandt sketch. This is Fish in concert. So these are kind of the preeminent art forms of our society nowadays. Do games belong up in this pantheon with these other forms? And another question is, are games a mass market medium? And this one I'm actually going to answer. We think that we see all the press where we make tons of money. Everyone plays games nowadays. I actually claim the answer to this is no in a bunch of important ways, and I'm going to spend some time talking about what that means. So what makes a medium mass market? I think there's a few different criteria or ways of judging mass marketness. One of those is revenue, the obvious. Units sold, whether for a film it would be tickets, for a book it would be a unit. Cultural impact, which is distinct from those, and diversity of content within the form. We're going to go through each one independently. Revenue is the most popular one that people use, including the game industry and the film industry and everyone. They talk about how much money we make. And you're always seeing these reports, every year it's like, oh, the game industry made just as much money as the film industry this year, so we must be real, right? And then the caveat, well, if you include hardware sales and you're only talking about box office for them, or, oh, now it's just domestic US, but now it's worldwide, and there's all these caveats. And the problem with revenue is it's a very fluid and a very brittle number. In fact, it's somewhat misleading, especially over time, because it's not corrected. Most revenue numbers aren't corrected for inflation, for example, or the price of a unit. For example, if the statistic I saw the other day is that game software last year made $8 billion, or then I also saw a statistic that said it made $27 billion. But there's the patent absurdity of that huge difference, but there's also, would it be a healthy industry if there had been one game made for that sold one copy for $27 billion, or is it better to sell 27 billion games for $1? Or how does that work? And so it's kind of interesting. Revenue hides all that information. The film industry actually knows this, and they use it on purpose. They manipulate the numbers that they make press about on purpose. Here's an example of how. Here's the US box office revenues currently, as of when I downloaded them from a website, not adjusted for inflation. So you see you've got Titanic there at 600 million US. These are just domestic. The Dark Knight, everyone was, which came out last year, Titanic came out 10 years ago. Dark Knight, which came out last year, made 533 million in the U.S. And people were saying, oh, it's going to pass Titanic. Oh, it's not quite going to pass. Oh, it's got a faster ramp up, et cetera. There's Star Wars, including its re-releases, and in a bunch of other games or films that you see on here. That it's not a very surprising list. And in fact, you can see it's heavily weighted towards games that are films that are new, right? Most of these are in the 2000s, and a lot of them are in late 2000. Why is that? Well, the answer to that actually is not because these are the most popular movies ever, or even that they made the most money. It's because they haven't been adjusted for inflation. If you adjust the list for inflation, it looks like this. And there's not a single movie from 2000 onward on here. In fact, there's not Dark Knight doesn't show up on this list until number 27. You can look at in 1939 when Gone with the Wind was released, in the U.S. alone, it made the equivalent of today's dollars, $1.4 billion. Star Wars, massively huge, because 1977, movies cost $1 to go to. You can see other things on this list that you just wouldn't imagine. The Sting made more money than Dark Knight in equivalent dollars, right? And this list actually is really interesting to contrast with this list, because this list is incredibly kind of derivative in a lot of sequels and a lot of kind of big budget summer blockbusters. And the list over time is actually much more balanced in terms of content, which I find kind of interesting. So if you switch to talking about units, things get a little more clear. There's a lot of data out there on the film industry and not so much data out there publicly available in the game industry, which I think is a big problem. But let's take some data that's with Gone with the Wind, which was released in the UK in 1940, and the British Film Institute did a big study trying to separate out repeat viewings and that kind of thing. And they saw that they found that the estimated tickets sold in 1940 for Gone with the Wind were 35 million tickets in the UK alone. Does anyone know what the population of the United Kingdom was in 1940? It was 43 million people. So, this includes repeat viewings, but a significant chunk of the population of all of Britain saw this movie. In the United States, it sold 202 million tickets, and there were only 130 million people in the country at the time. This is mass market, right? The ability to sell to significant chunks of your population with meaningful content. Here is kind of from the middle of this is not dollars, this is units sold, tickets sold on this side, estimated obviously, from an inflation-adjusted list. This is just from a chunk from the middle, here's Home Alone, 67 million tickets sold. By contrast, if you look at the top-selling standalone game ever, is We Play, which actually had a controller bundled with it, so it's not even that great of an example, but this is the top selling. So there are higher sellers, not by that much higher, but there are higher sellers that were bundled with the consoles themselves, so that get up into the 40 million range. If you look at this, We Play, 3 times as many people saw Home Alone as bought We Play. That's pretty amazing to me. And you might say, oh, well, what about franchises? We do these amazing franchises. Well, if you look at Mario, the estimates are that the entire franchise, all of the Mario games, have sold 210 million units. But that's spread out over 200 different SKUs. Mario Kart, Mario whatever, Mario this, that, Super Mario Brothers. Whereas you take something like Star Wars, in the US alone, 567 million tickets spread out only over 6 SKUs. And so the reach of films is so much larger. So another way of embedding this here is Zelda worldwide, and that Mario number is worldwide as well. Zelda worldwide, 57, if you add up all of the Zelda copies sold of all regions since the SNES, 57 million copies. In the US alone, 56 million tickets were sold to Tootsie. I bet no one in this room has even seen Tootsie, because you're all young, right? Who's seen? Yes, a few of you have seen Tootsie. It's Dustin Hoffman dressed up as a woman. It's a popular movie.